Good morning and welcome to the Branson Legacy Sabbath School. We are pleased with those who are in the Centennial Complex and with those who are on Zoom and with those who will be on Facebook and on YouTube. So our flock is scattered, but we are together in this way. We will have a potluck next Sabbath, June 25 at 1 p.m. here in the Centennial Complex. So maybe you can start, maybe you can begin planning for that now. Next Sabbath, our speaker will be Reinda Brunsma again. This time, though, we are going to be discussing one of his books that has not been discussed very much, and that is his book on the doctrine of the Sabbath. This is a scholarly book that he published some time ago, and because it's more academic, I don't think it's received the attention it deserves. Therefore, next week, we are going to hear from him about that book. Today, we're going to talk about abortion in the Bible. And this is the first of several. Later on, we'll have something called abortion and the church. And later on, after that, abortion and the law. So this is a summer of abortion because of what the Supreme Court is up to. And we will be following that in our own way. Here is Sirach, chapter 1. All wisdom is from the Lord, and with him it remains forever. The sand of the sea, the drops of rain, and the days of eternity, who can count them? The height of heaven, the breadth of the earth, the abyss, and wisdom, who can search them out? Wisdom was created before all other things, and prudent understanding from eternity. The root of wisdom, to whom has it been revealed? Her subtleties, who knows them? There is but one who is wise, greatly to be feared, seated upon his throne, the Lord. It is he who created her. He saw her and took her measure. He poured her out upon all his works, upon all the living according to his gift. He lavished her upon those who love him. We would be among those who love you and therefore have more wisdom than we might otherwise have had. Surely the issues we're now discussing require much wisdom from all of us at the personal level, at the institutional level, at the political level. And it may be that we won't say the same thing at every place. We know that over the last decades, hardly any progress toward consensus has been made on the issue of abortion in the United States, and we are troubled by that. If we can contribute to some greater unity on this matter, we would like to know how, and we would like to have the courage to do so. In Christ's name, amen. Before we get started, let me say just a little bit about this presentation today. This is on the Bible, and let me say right up front that I am pro-choice. But the Bible is very important no matter what position one takes on these issues. When I say I'm pro-choice, I mean I think the law should be quite permissive and leave up to the discretion of those who are involved what should be done in any particular case. I believe that the Seventh-day Adventist institutions rightly vary on this matter because they have greater or lesser ties to the Seventh-day Adventist denomination. Sometimes we have something that's not more closely tied to the denomination than a management contract. So there will be some variation there. And then I think at the personal level, we should be informed by the Bible very clearly. And so what I want to do today is read the Bible with personal ethics in view, not social ethics, not ecclesiastical ethics, but personal ethics in view. Now, one of my colleagues is Dr. Gerald Winslow, and he's going to be with us part of the time, but I don't see him here now. Does anybody? Okay, if people can keep an eye out for Jerry Winslow, when he arrives, let's bring him on board because there's a passage in the book of Exodus that is quite interesting. You received, well, I think all of you received the handout for this morning. And those who didn't, let's see if I can bring it up. 1 second.
Did you make Monty a co-host?
Yeah, 1 second here.
Yeah, and Jerry was in Sligo this morning, so maybe he hasn't got back yet.
Okay. Okay, so for those who don't have it, I have it here on the screen for you. And I would like to read along with you from this collection of texts. What I've done is try to bring together texts that give us the impression of the Bible as a whole on this issue of abortion. We do so keeping in mind that the Bible is not a book, even though the word Bible does mean book, but the Bible is a library. So we won't expect all persons to be saying the same thing in all times and places. So I'm going to make Monty a co-host here. 1 second. Okay. So I invite those of you who have this at home because you downloaded it and printed it to follow along as you can. And then those who don't have this material in hand, you can follow along with this on the screen. So one of the themes throughout the Bible is that children are gifts from God. Children are viewed as positive contributions to our lives. The more children one has, the better. I know of no one who was trying to limit the number of children he or she had in the times of the Bible. So that's not altogether like it is today. I think that sometimes we view children in a less positive fashion. So let me just read a familiar chapter, this one from Genesis, and it's the promise to Abraham that you've heard many times, but it emphasizes how important children are to biblical people. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, "By myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this and not withheld your son, your only son, I will bless you. And I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of their enemies. And by your offspring shall all the nations of the earth gain blessings for themselves, because you have obeyed my voice." So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived in Beersheba. So having many children, even today, is an important thing amongst Jewish people. I have often wondered why the Jewish people seem to be unusually blessed in so many ways. And I have a theory that's only part of the answer, and that is in Western Europe, Christians took many of their most talented people and told them to be celibate. The Jewish people did it the other way. They chose rabbis who would be wise, but also have many children and educate them well. And in that way, cultivate learning throughout the centuries. And I think when one eliminates from the gene pool many who are the most talented, and one keeps line breeding, as we would say, if we were dealing with horses, we see the difference. Now, I don't want to say that's the whole difference, but I do think it's part of it. Okay, now page 2. I'll scroll down here to page 2. This is one of the saddest stories in the whole Bible, because it shows how important children were to the people of Israel, but it also shows how desperately Leah and Rachel wanted, and Rebecca, I should say, Leah and Rachel wanted to have their husband's love. And they would do anything, it would seem, to earn his affection. And it's, I think, a very, very sad story about how they did this and how they did that in order to be pleasing to him. When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Leah conceived and bore a son, and she named him Reuben, for she said, "Because the Lord has looked upon my affliction, surely now my husband will love me." She conceived again and bore a son, and said, "Because the Lord has heard that I am hated, he has given me this son also." And she named him Simeon. Again she conceived and bore a son, and said, "Now this time my husband will be joined to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore he was named Levi." She conceived again and bore a son, and said, "This time I will praise the Lord." Therefore she named him Judah. Then she ceased bearing. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister, and she said to Jacob, "Give me children, or I shall die." Jacob became very angry with Rachel, and he said to her, "Am I in the place of God, who has withheld you from the fruit of the womb?" Then she said, "Here's my name, my maid Bilhah. Go into her, that she may bear upon my knees, and that I too may have children through her." So she gave him her name, maid Bilhah, as a wife. And Jacob went into her, and Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, "God has judged me, and has also heard my voice in giving me a son." Therefore she named him Dan. Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, with mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister and have prevailed. So she named him Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had ceased bearing children, she took her maid Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Then Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son. And Leah said, good fortune. So she named him Gad. Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. And Leah said, happy am I, for the women will call me happy. So she named him Asher. So here these women are trying in any way they can to please their husband by giving him children, and they will resort to using their maids in order to accomplish that. This is another indication of how sorrowful it was for people not to have children. But you remember this with the story of Samuel, where his mother was weeping at the temple because she had no children. And there are similar stories throughout the Bible. So that's one major theme. Now, there are a number of passages in the Bible which talk about God having a plan for a person even before he or she was born. So these are sometimes anticipations, and sometimes the people think back upon their lives and feel like God has been with them from the beginning. So you have some anticipation and some retrospection. Here we go for some retrospection. Now, this is a text that is often used in the abortion debates, but it's not really addressing abortion. It's a person praising God for how God has led him or her, we would say. God has led him or her throughout the whole of that person's life. And he says, as I come to the end of my life, it seems to me that you have been with me forever, even from when I was still in my mother's womb. For it was you who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works that I know very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes beheld my unformed substance. In your book were written all the days that were formed for me, when none of them as yet existed. How weighty to me are your thoughts. O God, how vast is the sum of them. I try to count them. They are more than sand. I come to the end. I come to the end. Excuse me. I come to the end. He's coming to the end of his life. I come to the end. I am still with you. So this is a person looking backward. There are many other texts like that. There are some where the text is looking forward. And you can see here, Jacob and Esau, Samson, Samuel, John the Baptist, and Jesus himself. So let's go back and choose one of the shorter ones because it is shorter. Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his prayer, and his wife Rebekah conceived. The children struggled together within her, and she said, if it is to be this way, why do I live? So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples born of you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, the elder shall serve the younger. When her time to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. The first came out, all his body like a hairy mantle, so they named him Esau. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand gripping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. So you have this idea that not only do people look back over the whole of their lives and feel that God had been with them right from the very beginning, right from when they had conceived. And then there are stories where God is looking at a new life and says, I have plans for you. So there's a kind of anticipatory theme that goes on. And of course, we have this with Jesus. Now, is Dr. Winslow with us?
Hi, Dave. Good morning, everybody.
Okay. Thank you, Jerry, for joining us right on time for this controversial passage. And I'm glad you're here because this is a fascinating portion of the Bible. It's fascinating, I think, for two reasons. One of them, people discuss a little bit what the passage actually means. And the second is that the passage is very clearly related to something that was written long ago, prior to Exodus. So this is from the Code of Hammurabi, about 1750. I know the experts debate these dates, and I'm just taking one that I think is about right. And I'll let the experts keep on debating that. But here it goes. This is from verses 195 down through verse 209. It's really quite easy to read in English. If a son strikes his father, they shall cut off his hand. If a man destroys the eye of another man, they shall destroy his eye. If he breaks another man's bone, they shall break his bone. If he destroys the eye of a plebeian, or breaks the bone of a plebeian, he shall pay a mina of silver. If he destroys the eye of a man's slave, or breaks a bone of a man's slave, he shall pay 1/2 his price. If a man knocks out a tooth of a man of his own rank, they shall knock out his tooth. If he knocks out a tooth of a plebeian, he shall pay her 1/3 mina of silver. If a man has struck a free woman with child and has caused her to miscarry, he shall pay 10 shekels for her miscarriage. If that woman die, his daughter shall be killed. If by a blow he has caused a plebeian's daughter to have a miscarriage, he shall pay 5 shekels of silver. If that woman has died, he shall pay 1/2 a mina of silver. If he has struck a freeman's female slave and caused her to have a miscarriage, he shall pay 2 shekels of silver. If that female slave has died, he shall pay 1/3 mina of silver. So that's from the Code of Hammurabi. Then we read from Exodus. These are the ordinances that you set before them. When you buy a male Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years. But in the 7th, he shall go out a free person without debt. If he comes in single, he shall go out single. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master gives him a wife and she bears him sons and daughters, the wife and her children shall be the master's, and he shall go out alone. But if the slave declares, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out a free person. Then his master shall bring him before God. He shall be brought to the door or the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him for life. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. If she does not please her master, who designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he has dealt unfairly with her. If he designates her for his son, he shall deal with her as with a daughter. If he takes another wife to himself, he shall not diminish the food, clothing, or marital rights of the first wife. And if he does not do these three things for her, she shall go out without debt, without payment of money. Whoever strikes a person mortally shall be put to death. If it was not premeditated, but come about by an act of God, then I will appoint for you a place to which the killer may be. But if someone willfully attacks and kills another by treachery, you shall take the killer from my altar for execution. Whoever strikes father or mother shall be put to death. Whoever kidnaps a person, whether that person has been sold or is still in possession, shall be put to death. Whoever curses father or mother shall be put to death. When individuals quarrel and one strikes the other with a stone or fist, so that the injured party, though not dead, is confined to bed, but recovers and walks around outside with the help of a staff, then the assailant shall be free of liability, except to pay for the loss of time and to arrange for full recovery. When a slave owner strikes a male or female slave with a rod and the slave dies immediately, the owner shall be punished. But if the slave survives a day or two, there is no punishment, for the slave is the owner's property. Let me get this down a little bit further here. When people who are fighting, now this is the portion that gets debated in Christian circles, Jewish circles. When people who are fighting injure a pregnant woman so that there is a miscarriage, and yet no further harm follows, the one responsible shall be fined what the woman's husband demands, paying as much as the judges determine. If any harm follows, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. When a slave owner strikes the eye of a male or female slave, destroying it, the owner shall let the slave go, a free person, to compensate for the eye. If the owner knocks out a tooth of the male or female slave, the slave shall be let. Okay, let me try again. I lost myself. If the owner knocks out a tooth of a male or female slave, the slave shall be let go, a free person, to compensate for the tooth. When an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox shall be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be liable. If the ox has been accustomed to gore in the past, and its owner has been warned but has not restrained it, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner shall be put to death. If a ransom is imposed on the owner, then the owner shall pay whatever is imposed for the redemption of the victim's life. If it gores a boy or a girl, the owner shall be dealt with according to this same rule. If the ox gores a male or female slave, the owner shall pay the slave owner 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. If someone leaves a pit open or digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall make restitution, giving money to his owner, but keeping the dead animal. If someone's ox hurts the ox of another so that it dies, then they shall sell the live ox and divide the price of it, and the dead animal they shall also divide. So it's verses 22 and following right through here that we get discussed. Now, Dr. Winslow, what would you like to say about all this?
Well, Dave, I didn't come to teach. I sent you some information because I'm puzzled. I came to learn, so I'm hoping somebody can help us here. And I see that Donna Carlson KO is present. Maybe she can comment on rulemaking like this. Some of this must make us wince, I suppose, and some of us make us smile. Every time I go down the freeway and I see that the fine for driving in the high occupancy vehicle lane when you're not high occupancy vehicle is, I think, currently $401. And I think, wow, somebody had to sit in Sacramento and just not 399, but 401. How did they know that that was just the right amount? And some of this, you read and you wonder what's behind the rulemaking about the specifics. But the reason that I wanted to just point out the similarity to the Code of Hammurabi is that I think general scholarly opinion is that both the Code of the Covenant, which is what we call this section of the Pentateuch, it's that from Exodus 21 to 23, where after the gift of the 10 Commandments come on Mount Sinai, then Moses goes back and gets this whole covenant code, and the people agree to follow it. And you've got the dates. Well, there's an argument about when this would have appeared in the Hebrew literature, but in any case, it's hundreds of years after the Code of Hammurabi. I don't think there's any argument about that. So scholarly opinion would probably in the past have said they both may appeal to a legal tradition from the past, and they're both borrowing it from that tradition. But then I came across a piece that I thought probably reflected more of what my hunch has been, and I'm not in a scholarly position to offer more insight on it, but my hunch has been that no, there's a rather more direct connection. And there's several reasons for seeing that as a fairly direct connection between the Code of Hammurabi and the Covenant Code. One is that the close proximity of the so-called lex talionis, or the law of strict retaliation, the eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, that comes in the context, in both cases, in the context of penalties for causing a miscarriage. That's so specific, it doesn't look like just a coincidence. So there are a lot of similarities. There's a different level of punishment. There's a two-tier level of punishment for causing a miscarriage in the Covenant Code, one for causing the death of the woman who's pregnant, and a different level for causing the loss of the fetus. That's very similar to the Code of Hammurabi, but then there are differences, and the differences are also interesting. In the Code of Hammurabi, the penalty if you cause the death of a woman who's pregnant is they take the life of your daughter, a kind of vicarious punishment. Whereas here, they take the person's life. Then it's the strict law of retaliation, or the lex talionis, a life for a life. And so what? I mean, what does all of this have to do with the topic at hand? It's not, I don't, first of all, we have to acknowledge this is not a text about abortion. It's not, there's nothing about the context that would tell us that it is. But you notice that there is a distinction that's made in the intentional causing of the death of another and the accidental cause. So, I mean, I have the Code of Hammurabi in front of me, and it says, if during a quarrel a man strikes another and wound him, then he shall swear, I did not injure him wittingly. And then the penalty is he has to pay for the doctors. But there's a distinction made between whether you did it on purpose or not. And that seems to be carried over into the covenant code. I think the most that we can get out of this relative to the status, the moral status of prenatal life, is to say that it's important. And if you destroy prenatal life, there is a penalty, even if you did it unwittingly. But it's not the same as capital murder. And that's about as far as we could go with this. And why even mention the Code of Hammurabi? Because there was already that tradition in that part of the world that makes that kind of distinction. No, that's all I have to offer, Dave. It's not going to answer most of the questions.
Well, that's a lot. And I think it's an interesting passage. Now, I think that one reason this passage is interesting is that it suggests that those people knew more about, that is, these biblical people knew more about what was going around them culturally than sometimes we think. Because I have sometimes heard these ancients described as quite rudimentary in their knowledge. But I think that these caravans going between Egypt and Assyria, I think that they became acquainted with a lot of different things, and that we should be careful about suggesting that they weren't very smart or weren't very informed. That's one thing. This shows that the kind of cultural knowledge. Another thing that I think is interesting, and that is the whole issue of intention. Now, we fought for hundreds of years, thousands of years, to make an intention ethically and relevant, legally relevant. But now, there are those who are telling us that intention doesn't matter. If you exercise microaggression against me, whether you intended to do so or not, doesn't matter. You did so, and you should recognize that and make amends or be punished in whatever way that's appropriate. And I'm very reluctant to let this business of intention slip away from us culturally, even if we do so in the name of some great project. I do think these other passages reinforce the correctness of your reading of Exodus here, because there are people who will use this passage to protect the fetus. And I am aware of one 70-page document that tries to make that point. But it's clear to me that the other surrounding cultures with which the authors of this document were acquainted clearly made that distinction. So that distinction is one that feeds into our understanding of this text. Now, would you want to respond to that in any way, Jerry?
No, I think that's right. And I think traditional Jewish interpretation, so far as I'm familiar with it, would say the same. That is, the text is made. I've seen the arguments that try to say that there's capital punishment for the causing of a miscarriage, but that's not convincing to traditional Jewish interpretation. And I don't think it's very convincing given the words of the text themselves. And I don't think it's convincing relative to the tradition in the culture that surrounded Israel.
So that's three different matters. Okay.
Who's that?
Monty,
David Larson talking about.
Excuse me? Monty, do you want to comment here, or do you, shall we go? I've got two more paragraphs.
I had a
Okay,
question
right here.
for you, Dave.
Yeah.
You were making the distinction between attention or not. When in the Bible text, it seemed like intention wasn't excused. There was still a result. So it wasn't that you weren't held responsible. It was just that you were held less responsible if you did it intentionally or not. Am I misunderstanding that? And
Uh,
to
go
relate
ahead.
that to
I'm
microaggressions, it would be that I might not hold someone as responsible for an unknown microaggressions, but I would still say they're responsible for what they've done. And to me, that's congruent with the Bible text. Help me understand if I'm wrong.
Well, we've got two things going on here, right? What the text says and then what's going on now. With respect to the text, the cities of refuge were provided, and the person who had done wrong unintentionally fled to those cities of refuge. And they are in other cultures around the world. There were cities of refuge amongst the ancient peoples of Hawaii, for instance, and they had the same purpose. Someone who inadvertently did something very wrong could flee to the city of refuge and be protected there. Now, does that mean that the person in the city of refuge paid no penalty whatsoever for his or her wrongdoing on the grounds that the intention not being present fully excuses that individual? Or is it the case that even those in the city of refuge need to pay some penalty? I don't know. I have never heard someone say that someone in the city of refuge still has to pay a penalty of some sort. But it may be that being protected from being killed was enough of a protection that people didn't worry too much about whatever else they might be going to have to suffer as a response to their wrongdoing. In any case, there is clearly the possibility in the ancient text that the person who fled to the city of refuge could be free entirely, but I'm not sure of that. It could go either way, and I think anthropologists who study this in other cultures could help us on this matter. Now, with respect to today, of course, I think that what you've said is exactly right. That someone who commits a microaggression or macroaggression should be admonished or punished. Those are hard words and I don't want to use them, but there should be some kind of penalty for that. Or does that always have to happen? Is it sometimes possible for a person to say, ouch, what you said really hurt me, and then laugh and go on? And the person who made the mistake determines not to make that same mistake again? Or do we have to pause and make an issue of it, which might be more intense than the matter deserves? See, one cannot talk the way I have just now without being thought of as being a chauvinist. But I do think we need to think carefully about this. My own view is that if we spare people the consequences of their decisions, they will keep on making those bad decisions. And it's not being cruel to have people experience the bad consequences of their wrongdoings. And I think that if the aggression is not merely a micro one, but a macro one, and if it continues, I think the response should be pretty severe. But you can see I'm pausing. I'm wrestling with this because I think people who move in this direction have a reason for doing so, and that reason is important. But I have seen situations where it seemed to me that people were so sensitive that even unintentional remarks became major issues, even though the person who made the mistake determines not to do it again. So for me, this is a complex issue. I don't want to land on either side, because I think there is a danger. There is a danger by saying, well, I didn't intend it, so what? You know, I gave you $1,000 to invest and you lost it all. Well, you didn't intend to lose it, so what? Well, no, I think you ought to repair my $1,000. So the intention does matter. It does not matter in some cases. Anyway, I think we need to be try to be subtle about this matter. It's a tough one. Monty, please respond.
Oh, I think we're kind of along similar lines. I would agree that I think intention matters, and I think sometimes proportionality of response is critical to human relations, and I think very appropriate even beyond human relations in terms of the ethics of dealing with situations. So proportionality is important, and also an openness to growth.
Right. I like that expression. It's not one that I thought of, but proportionality is a very good way of putting it. I was reaching for something and didn't quite have it, but I think that notion of proportionality in the response is a good one. Now we can take that back to the text, because these texts are insisting on proportionality. That's the point of these texts. When it says an eye for an eye, it means only one eye for an eye. When it says a tooth for a tooth, it means only one tooth for a tooth. When it says what? An ear for an ear, I don't think it actually says that, but only one ear for an ear. These statements are meant to limit disproportionate responses. And I think sometimes they're understood as mandating these responses. And I don't think that that's so. I think if one doesn't kill one's child for having spoken disrespectfully, I don't think that's violating the Bible. But I think that to not only to do that, to really respond to a child's disrespect in a very disproportionate way is not justified. So let's understand what's going on here in this text. These are not mandates for certain punishments as much as they are restrictions of disproportionality. Okay, somebody else wanted to talk. Should we get people in at the Centennial Complex before they leave?
Yes, that would be great. I can hold my question. I just did have a question for clarification, David.
Okay.
And that was, did you say that when someone fled to the city of refuge, they didn't have to pay anything? Or did you say that?
No, what I said was, I don't know. I don't know.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, I was going to respond, say they did pay something. They had to leave immediately and get on their horse or whatever and get to that city of refuge before a relative got them. Once they got to the city of refuge, they were judged, whether it was intentional or not. So there was a penalty, even if it was unintentional.
I'm sorry, Forrest, but this is helpful to me. So if they got into the city of refuge and they were judged to have acted unintentionally, then was there a penalty of some sort imposed on the person who had done the wrong thing?
They had to stay there until the high priest died. They couldn't go back to their home.
Okay, that was the penalty.
Yeah.
They in effect had life imprisonment for life.
Well, you would hope the high priest wouldn't live 99 years. So,
Right. Okay.
anyway, okay.
But that's an answer to the question as to whether there's any punishment in the city of refuge for those who ran there because they unintentionally hurt someone. That's very helpful. Thank you, Forrest.
Yeah, but now you want to go to the Centennial Complex, see if there's anybody in there.
Let's see if we can.
We'll get to you, Rodney, in just a minute.
Okay, I am connected.
Yes.
the first commandment that God gave the first pair in Eden was grow up, be fruitful, and multiply. And it looks to me that the Jews took this commandment. And as you mentioned, Dave, throughout centuries, they had children, and also they took good care of their education. Well, there is also a text in Genesis that we should pause about it and reflect more about one of Judah's children, Onan, that avoid having children. When he had intercourse, he avoid trying to have children. Now, personally, I believe that the government should not legislate how many children a family can have or should have. We lived in a communist country, and when we were living in Romania, the government imposed the law on the people to have at least 4 children. The problem was that, the law said to have 4 children, but they were not able to provide for the families to take care of these children. And I believe that the government, the role of the government is this, is not to legislate, but to encourage families to have children, but also to provide for them to have a good education and to take good care of them. Messing up with demographics, it's a serious problem. In recent time in China, they tried to legislate for people to have for families to have just 1 child. Well, I believe in recent time, they realized that it's a problem with this, and I think now they have, by law, 3 children. Again, we should be very careful trying to legislate to mess up with demographics. Of course, another observation will be that in agricultural societies, usually families, they have more children because they need more children to work the land. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. That's all very helpful. I do wonder if those of us who live north of the equator are having enough children. And that could have, if the answer to that is no, that could have some serious long-term consequences. Is there anyone else there at the Centennial Complex who wants to speak?
Yes, Donna.
Thank you, Dave and Jerry. Jerry brought up the issue of how laws are formed. And generally, I think they reflect the values and then eventually the changing values of the society in which they appear. But some of those values stay for a long time. And we now have many of the same elements that you see in Hammurabi or in Hebrew law that are continued and are major elements of current law. Regarding, I was trying to look up the Keeler case in California, Keeler, which I think is a case from the 80s, in which an irate ex-husband beat up his ex-wife, who at that time was about 8 months pregnant with her current lover's child. And he found her on a lonely road and beat her very badly, caused her to have a miscarriage. And the district attorney then tried to charge him with both assault of the woman and murder of the child, who was just about ready for delivery anyway. And that case, the court said no, the fetus, even though it was almost a full-term baby, is not a child. He cannot be held to answer for the death of that child, but he could be charged and was eventually jailed for the injury inflicted on the woman. And as I was doing that, I came across a case that is in the California courts, or was in the courts just this year. And you all can look it up. It's Perez, came out of, I think, Hanford, so the Central District, in which a mother was charged, a long-term meth addicted mother who had already 7 methamphetamine addicted children out of 9 that she had. This baby would have been, her current baby would have been her 10th, and that baby was stillborn. And the doctor, and interestingly, it happened in an Adventist hospital, and the physician at the Adventist hospital diagnosed a rupture placenta the placenta separated because of her long-term methamphetamine use. And the district attorney in that case charged her with, eventually she was convicted of manslaughter in the death of her child, this 10th child, and was sentenced to 11 years in prison, of which she has served 4, and then brought her case back to court earlier this year, with the argument that she'd had incompetent counsel the first time around. And now that case, apparently, I haven't read it, I just found it, has gone to the California Supreme Court, which has formally declared that a fetus is not a person. So the stillborn child, she could not be charged with murder or manslaughter. Manslaughter being she didn't have an intention to kill the child, but nonetheless, her behavior resulted in the death of the infant. So intention is still important, but a term fetus, at least in California, doesn't count as a person. And one more item. I think it's very odd in current law that an unborn child can be a person for purposes of inheritance. And the basis, the oldest law is property law. And it's reflected, I think, again, in the way that state law allows for inheritance of an unborn. The unborn child can be an heir to family assets, for instance, but cannot be considered a person for purposes of murder, a murder victim.
I'm going to use the word citizen rather than human or person. Citizen works better for me. And I gather that we have these 2 cases, one of which suggests that the fetus is a citizen and deserves the rights of a citizen, and the other which suggests no. But in California, I gather from what you said, it's settled. That is, the fetus is not a citizen, if we can use that word, right up to the moments before a normal live delivery. Is that what we're saying, Donna?
That's what the Cal Supreme Court said.
Yes.
Well, okay, that gives me pause. And I think we're going to have to talk about that. Roe v. Wade leaves open the possibility of states regulating abortion for the sake of the new life in the 3rd trimester. It leaves room for that, and I think all the states have taken advantage of that possibility. But some people fault Roe v. Wade for making that only an option for the states. But I am thinking about California. If we're saying that 5 minutes before labor begins, the new life cannot be treated as a citizen for some purposes, but for other purposes, it can. I wonder if that one's going to go to the Supreme Court of the United States. What do you think, Donna?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
One moment. I'm not as young as I used to be.
That's his excuse. He really just didn't want his wife to continue talking. but, that is the real truth. Yeah, I guess it's not unique to California that an unborn child can be considered if you want to use the word citizen, or a person with rights, depending on what particular situation we're talking about. But the big exception is inheritance, and there have been a lot of cases about that. Is a child that's not born at the time, for instance, of the father's death, but then later is born. Is that person a person for purposes of inheriting the assets of the estate, or does that person get bypassed and the other potential heirs take the property instead? And that's been, that's an old issue. I doubt it will go to the Supreme Court, because it's pretty well settled that for purposes of inheritance in every state that I know of, the unborn child is considered a citizen for purposes of owning property. And that's why in many cases you can't settle a will, for instance, until 10 months after the death of the father, the primary asset holder, because you don't know for sure if his wife is pregnant or not, and that this little person that may come along may own the property. But an interesting difference, I think, is between mens rea, intention and not intention, intentional killing and unintentional killing. And that's what I think is interesting between Keeler and this new Perez case. Clearly, the father said, the ex-husband said, and his words were recorded in the case, "I'm going to beat this out of you." And he intentionally beat her repeatedly in the abdomen and did cause the infant to die, as opposed to the mother, who was a severe meth addict and unintentionally caused the death of her baby. So, and in that case, the court said she was charged and convicted of manslaughter, but now the California Supreme Court said she can't even be convicted of manslaughter, not because she was a good person, but because she unintentionally caused the death of the child she was carrying.
Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you, Donna. Is there anyone else there in the Centennial Complex who wants to say something? Okay, there are several people here on Zoom that want to speak. I wonder if we can take a break and pick them up after the break. Is that okay?
That's what I'm going to suggest, and then we'll pick up in 10 minutes or whenever we go and take it from there. Yeah, so raise your hand if you want to get on the queue. And
I'd like to, if I could have just maybe 3 minutes to finish out my handout and then go over to the questions.
I think we can squeeze you in, David. We'll work on it.
Okay. So now it's 11:36. Shall we say what? 11:50?
Yeah, let's do that. 11:50. We'll be
Okay.
back on. Okay. I'm going to stop the recording. Okay. Go ahead, David.
1 second. Thank you very much. I just wanted to bring attention to two different themes before we move to the questions and answers and discussion. One of them is that the Bible doesn't put as much value on the family as one might originally think. And we have this story here where Jesus was asked about his brothers and sisters, and he turned to those who were his friends, disciples, colleagues, and said, "These are my friends." And so that sort of relativizes the importance of the family. Now, I had quite a discussion about this some years ago with a rabbi who had written a book on Jesus, and from a rabbi's point of view. And his main complaint about Jesus was that Jesus undervalued the family. And I went back and forth with him on that for a while, but that was for him, a key issue. And I think we ought to take it seriously and not regard the family as sort of the end all and be all of human society. Okay, so there you have some text on that topic. Now, this was the one we often ask this question: when is the new life human? Well, the new life is human from the time of the very beginning. That is, it's always human genetic material. It's never anything else but that. So asking the question that way, I think, is a bit of a problem. Then we'll ask, who is a person? And I think that is more helpful. And I would say that the clock starts ticking on personhood at implantation, not conception, but implantation, and continues from there, and personhood, or the potential for personhood, increases. I like to make a distinction that I think is a real one. That is, it's different from being, there is a difference between being a potential person and being a possible person. A potential person is an individual who has everything within him or her to become a person if nothing goes wrong. A possible person doesn't have that. A single sperm or a single ovum might be possible persons, but they don't have what it takes to become persons in and of themselves yet. Okay, so then I want to end up by saying, I think that asking whether this individual is a person or a citizen, or let alone a human being, is helpful in some ways. But I think we need to remember that one does not have to be a human, a person, or a citizen to matter to God. If God watches when a sparrow falls to its death, I think we can safely presume that God notices when a third trimester fetus is killed. So I think the Christian presumption against abortion is pretty strong, but it is a presumption, and presumptions are rebuttable depending upon the circumstances that we're in. Okay, that's all for me, Forrest.
Okay, David, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to go through the list here now. I've got, okay, Rodney. Welcome back again, Rodney. Coming to you.
And Forrest, thank you for your kind welcome. Firstly, I want to acknowledge Jerry Winslow. Some of you may remember a couple of years ago that he gave a position paper that I think, Jerry, you're going to present to the Adventist health institutions. And I've always wondered how that those presentations went. But at that point of time, your presentation was clearly the superior document that I've ever seen put together on the matter of abortion. And if that's available to class members here, and perhaps it's been updated, but I would encourage class members to get their hands on that document if Jerry is willing to make it available. I think my second point here, and I've got two points in the question, is there is really an important distinction between ancient Hebrew laws and the Hammurabi laws, and that was already touched upon. The Hebrew laws generally came without penalties. If you consider the 10 Commandments, they came without penalties. But where there were penalties, they were proportionate, and that word's been mentioned, and it should be underscored, I believe. Any rabbi, Hebrew rabbi, would tell you today that these laws that we went through this morning are the cornerstone of Western justice. They're proportionate, and therefore they are the cornerstone of compassionate justice. We get our sense of fairness from them. We get our sensibilities of what is fair, not fair from them. And that's in part why there's such an outcry from people in California and New York recently about the magnitude of the early release of criminals. It offends our Western sensibilities of fairness. Victims are not being served. And so these laws are embodied in our Western laws. The Hammurabi laws that were first written, or at least formed, by a writer in cuneiform called Shamash. He was the sun god of Mesopotamia. And so you can trace back the origins of the Hammurabi laws back another 200 or 300, 400 years. These laws were very exacting penalties, and they were not often commensurate with the crime. Still evident in Islam today, and that is why our Western sensibilities are often offended by what appears to be the overreaching Hammurabi laws that were developed over time that required stoning and death. Okay, so enough of that. My question is, and has been for a long time, is the Bible silent on abortions? I've heard a number of Adventists say the Bible is silent on abortions, so let's move on with more contemporary thought and ideas and policies. And I think in the absence of maybe clear abortion guidelines from the Bible, people will always backfill with their own understandings, prejudices, biases, or personal opinions. And I think that was what I read that David, you sent out during the week. I thought put to rest that question, is the Bible silent on abortions? However, frankly, some of the ancient stuff that we used and were read this morning, I think was very obtuse on the matter. And I was not able to go one direction or the other. So I'm still back with maybe my original question is it fair for Adventists and Christians to say the Bible is silent on abortion?
May I respond to that, Forrest?
Please, David.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I think Jerry's still here. I'd like to hear his response as well. I once heard Beverly Harrison, who is probably the most strident Christian proponent of a pro-choice position, say, let's get this clear. The Bible is pro-natal. She didn't say life. The Bible is pro-natal. And so for sure, the Bible says nothing explicitly about abortion, nothing. We do have to nail that down. On the other hand, I've tried to present some passages which show that human life is important, the lives of children are important, and prenatal human life is important from the point of view of the ancient Hebrews. So and I think those are important enough to establish presumptions, very strong presumptions against abortion. But those presumptions can be overturned, and we could talk about ways they could be overturned. But no, the idea that the Bible is silent on abortion is technically true, but there's much in the Bible that indirectly relates to this. And I think what's in the Bible causes us to pause at the practice of abortion in a cavalier or common or in different ways. Now, that's one thing. On the other hand, Rodney, I'm not persuaded that Exodus 21 gives us proportionate punishments. It seems to me that the punishment for disrespecting one's father or mother is disproportionate to the crime in Exodus 21. So I do think that those are limits, eye for an eye and tooth for tooth, those are limits, but some of those punishments in Exodus 21 strike me as extreme, excessive, inappropriate, and thankfully not put into practice today.
Agreed.
I would like to say, go ahead.
No, just agreed, Dave, and they didn't last. They weren't perpetuated. But I agree with what you're saying. Some of them are Hammurabic, I guess, in their writing.
Okay, but let's get down to let's get down to it. My view is that nobody with any position whatsoever on the abortion issue should appeal to Exodus 21. I think it's just not appropriate for pro-choice people to appeal to it or for pro-life people to appeal to it. My view is unless one is prepared to put into practice everything else that is in that chapter, one should not extract those few verses from them and make them normative today while not making the other stuff normative today. So I would prefer that everybody just take Exodus 21, put it aside, and then read what else the Bible has to say on this issue in a general way. And then other things. We have to consider science, we have to consider reason, we have to consider the history of the church and so forth. But I think Exodus 21 should be nobody's property. Jerry, do you want to say anything about this?
I don't see Jerry up there, yeah.
I see his picture, but he may not be.
Hey, by the way, David, you forgot to mention about gathering sticks on the Sabbath too. That
Yeah,
required stoning. And
yeah, I think there are some of those rules that are proportionate, some that are dreadfully not proportionate. Okay, that's for me. Over to you, Forrest.
okay, I would now like to go to Simona. Simona, you're on.
Thank you. Well, I echo what everybody else said, that the Bible is absolutely silent when it comes to the issue of abortion. And I think that is actually an important fact, given that abortion has been a norm for thousands of years of humanity in all societies. This is a well-known and supported fact. Also, birth control has been a norm of some sort. You know, people always tried in some way to control how many children and had and when. But one thing that actually does come out from the text that you have mentioned is that there is absolutely no question that the life of a woman has greater value than the life of a fetus. That is absolutely true. There is nothing in this text that equalizes the value of the fetal life to the value of the woman's life. Nothing. And I think this is important. Secondly, in June.
I'm sorry, I muted you by mistake, Simona.
Thank you.
I apologize.
Yeah, no problem. So secondly, in Jewish tradition, life begins with breath. And this is actually based on the Bible, where Adam's life began with breath of life, right? Similarly, in Catholic tradition, the child doesn't have a soul until it takes the first breath. And so stillborn children cannot have religious funeral. They oppose abortion on different rules. So technically speaking, fetus is a promise of a life. And even the issue of inheritance that Donna mentioned, the fetus doesn't inherit. The child, when it's born, inherits. So everything that we talked about, you know, it starts at a time when the fetus becomes born. For people who don't think that there is a difference between fertilized egg and a human being, I'm going to ask you next time when you're baking a cake and it's asking for 6 eggs, use half a chicken and tell me how that worked out. You know, there are certain things that are different, and there is a process in which a life that starts, the promise of a life that starts with fertilized egg goes through tremendous change to become a person. And finally, the issue of personhood. Ethically speaking, personhood starts at the time when the brain is developed. there is no personhood before that. So these are, you know, I think very important issues when you talk about abortion and, you know, what the Bible says about it. And I think it's important to note that Bible actually doesn't say anything.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Simona. David, did you want to respond at all, or should I just go on to my next questioner? Okay.
Just
oh,
just
go
a
ahead.
second. It's not necessary to do this now because we'll do it later. To pause over the Roman Catholic position because it's worthy of more consideration. Let me leave it that way. But the fact is, one could save the mother but not the fetus in many cases. But how could one save the fetus but not the mother? So there's in that context, and even in our own, the Roman Catholic Church recognizes that under the principle of double effect. But we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
But the thing I want to leave, though, I think this is important, and that is there is, to use Beverly Harrison's language, there is a pronatal tendency in the Bible that we need to take seriously. Okay.
All right. Okay, I will now come to Anastasia with her short question.
Thank you very much, Forrest. Thank you, Dr. Larson and everyone. Just a little comment on sanctuary. And some of those things are more pertinent in our New Testament. I'm not that knowledgeable at all of the Old Testament, but in classical Greece in 5th century BC, it was established that in Athens, Sparta had different laws. It was established that anyone, when criminal, that would take refuge in the University of Athens or the grounds or the building was untouchable, that no one was allowed under the penalty of death to kill him or injure him in any way. But no one also was allowed to bring food or water to that person. So if he died, and I think they were also depending on the crime, the length of time that they will be there without any assistance. A great example was the General Epaminondas, I believe that was the name, who in there was a 40-year civil war between Athens and Sparta, and that's actually what took the Athenian democracy and the empire down. Epaminondas switched from Athens to Spartan causes, so he was condemned to death, but he ran into the university and he was allowed to live there, but he was not allowed to give him help. So that was the Athenian sanctuary. And my question and maybe comment is this about abortion. I personally believe also in the providence of God, that everything is not under the microphone, who is a person, who is not. And personally, we would know personally people that if they were aborted, society wouldn't have their wisdom, so on and so forth. At the same time, I recognize all the different terrible injustices towards women. And here's the question. For those of us, for the church, for the people, by the church, I mean the people and the leaders of the church, that, yeah, we don't believe the state should go to everybody's affair, but ethically, we believe, or theologically, in the providence of God, or to do anything to save a potential person in life. Don't we also have the responsibility to create, as you said, to take the notion, we have the honor shame thing, to take the shame and help that person and the families and counsel, because so many probably would not go into abortion, and we have counseled anyway, if they had the means and the support, the moral, the psychological, even the, for them and their child. And it's so absurd, don't you think, that especially a party that's so much for pro-life, as they call it, that they will not care once the child or the mother is, is there, what happens to that child. But we, at least as people in church, don't we have to do all we can to help maybe those women that do not want to have abortion? And the other thing is, shouldn't our schools, and especially the church schools, they say it's the people's job, but many parents don't know or whatever, to educate both technically how you get a baby, and what is promiscuity and what is not, and all of those things that are complex. But I believe we cannot just on one for all that it's okay, use it as a contraceptive or whatever else. There have to be ethical standards. Thank you, Dr. Larson.
David, do you want to respond?
I would like to respond. Thank you, Forrest. I think this is where we should not conclude our discussion, but I hope this is a note on which we end. That is, I think that whenever a new life begins, that should be a cause for celebration, no matter how that new life began. When my father was a pastor, he said, well, in our church, we don't have any unwanted babies. We have some unscheduled ones, but we can change our schedule. So sometimes the mystery of life and the power of that miracle is something that needs to be celebrated all the time. I've sometimes had women in my work, sometimes women will talk to me about the fact that they're pregnant and they are just utterly distraught, they're not coming to advice about the abortion issue. They're just wanting someone to listen to them while they express their anguish. And I listen and I say, wait a minute. Do you know how many people there are in the world who have no children and would like to? Do you know how many people there are in the world who will never have grandchildren, but you might? Do you realize that when you hold that child in your arms and that child looks up into your face and you look down into its face, his or her face, you aren't going to be at all worried about how that child is conceived. And if you are, there's something wrong with you. And the church should celebrate new lives. If the stigma were not what it shouldn't be, we could handle this much more joyfully. Whenever a new life comes into our congregation, we should praise God, from whom all blessings flow.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I'd like to go to McKinley now. McKinley.
Thanks. Thanks, Forrest.
You're welcome.
I'll put some gratuity in
Oh
the
yeah, and
tip
I'll be looking for it. And when you get out of witness protection, we can have lunch together or something.
Thank you. I've got two sets of comments. One of them I'll put towards the end, and it's with respect to Dr. Winslow's question about how some regulations are formed, how the numbers sometimes end up in certain ways. But thanks, Dave, for treating this delicate topic in a balanced way. I appreciated that. I have a few observations that perhaps you can comment on. First, I found the framing of the issue instructive, God and gestation, favoring children or favoring life. At least that was my takeaway. Second, Dr. Winslow's characterizations are also noteworthy without attributing any implications to him. But prenatal life is important. I think that came out very clearly. That framing is consistent with an insight that Dr. Cupino shared in one of our potluck discussions, where he introduced the idea of the child development continuum, meaning that from conception through adulthood and perhaps maybe even to the end of life, that life forms a continuum. And so there is really no point in the phasing or the differences that people have tried to define along that continuum. But the other important thing that I found from Dr. Winslow is that there is a penalty for destroying prenatal life in the text that was examined. There's a distinction in consequences between the intentional cause of a death versus the accidental cause of a death with respect to the miscarriage here. And I just wonder if there's a third category, a purposeful destruction of prenatal life. And I think there's a nuance between intentional and purposeful. Combining those two ideas poses to me a conundrum for Christian stakeholders in the choice camp and even stakeholders in general in the choice camp, and that is a question of consistency. The example that Donna gave highlights the inconsistency issue where the unborn child is treated not as a person for purposes of the choice question, but yet for purposes of settling an inheritance question, they could be treated as a citizen or person. The primary troubling inconsistency for me vis-a-vis the choice stakeholders is the following. If a woman wants a child and is harmed, resulting in the loss of the child, the offender can and often is prosecuted. On the other hand, if a woman doesn't want the child and she's at liberty to destroy that unborn child. So how do you respond to these observations? And then this last point here, in balancing the life and liberty rights of the US Constitution, it seems to me that a society that promotes life is more favorable or desirable. Thank you.
Hey. David, we're up
Well,
there.
yeah, it would help me.
Jerry's up. Jerry's here now.
Okay, let's get to Jerry in, but then after Jerry, I'd like to go back to McKinley and have him elaborate on this distinction between purposeful and intentional, because I think that may be important to his thinking on this matter. Maybe Jerry wants to say something.
I really came to listen, but since McKinley mentioned me a time or two, I have long thought that we should take into account all of the values that come into these the complex cases of what are sometimes crisis pregnancies even. And while I am of the opinion, and I believe that there's a good faithful basis for this, that prenatal life is important and deserves our strong consideration and protection, there are other values at stake. And I think that there's often inadequate attention given to the fact that we are asking another person to sustain that life when it may not be her choice. For example, in the change of the Adventist statement that came about in 2019, the exception for rape was deliberately omitted. It wasn't inadvertent. They considered whether or not rape would be an exception and decided to leave it out. Personally, I think that's not just debatable, I think it's outrageous. We have someone who may have been subjected to an assault, and now they're required, are they, by law, to continue that pregnancy? I hope there are at least a few people who would share my intuition that that's serious injustice. And while I have the floor, let me just point out that we don't make anyone even give a pint of blood, a unit of blood, do we? We have people dying for want of blood sometimes. We've had a serious blood shortage during the pandemic. But how would you feel about being in a society that forced people, not just made it possible for them to give, but now they have to give? And how would you compare with giving a pint of blood to save a life with being pregnant for 9 months? Anyway, I can go on in that vein. The most interesting case in American history that I can think of, but I don't see Donna here to comment on it, is a Schimpf versus McFall, where one cousin wanted the bone marrow of his cousin so he could continue living. And initially the cousin with the matching bone marrow agreed, but then he changed his mind and decided not to give the bone marrow. And when the cousin then went to court to force the cousin to give the marrow, the court said it may be reprehensible to fail in giving the marrow, which he could relatively easily give, but it would be completely unacceptable and an offense to personal integrity to force the person to give the bone marrow. Somehow that it seems obvious to most people that the court probably got that right, but why is it right, especially in light of what we're talking about here? So anyway, enough from me. I think we're balancing our values best we can, and I just would encourage all of us to rise above the level of bumper stickers that we've all seen and realize that it's more complicated than the bumper stickers.
All right, thank you, Jerry. David, did you want McKinley to redefine or more fully define at this
I would
time?
be interested in hearing him say a little bit more about that.
Okay.
Thanks, Dave. As usual, these RBLSS class discussions trigger, some thought while the conversations are happening. And this third category essentially came to mind as David was speaking on an earlier topic. But an example differentiating the intentional versus the purposeful might be, say, a person that engages abortion to support a lifestyle. And then a purposeful type might be, say, an abortion that happens because somebody was raped. Does that help, Dave?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Okay, Forrest.
Okay. I want to go to Alicia. Alicia, you're up. I know you're there, Alicia. Well, your hand's up. I think I've lost. Oh, here she is. That's okay.
Sorry.
You're on.
This is going back a little bit off the subject, but at least according to Wikipedia, which I know is not, totally a good source, but it does appear that Scott Peterson was convicted of second-degree murder of the unborn child. And that was upheld or what in the resentencing, which was, I think, last December. That was still the case.
Okay.
And that was in California.
Sure, right. Yeah, but well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay. Before I go to Simona, I would, if I could enter into and ask, I'd say not so much ask a question, but make a couple comments. I find that sometimes this abortion issue is taken out of a broader context, and that is the life of a child in general. And there was a saying back 20, 30 years ago that, according to many in this discussion, that life begins at conception and ends at birth. And I find so many of the people that want to prohibit abortion don't want to vote for women and infants, nutrition, food stamps, better schools, gun laws. I'm going to say it just seems like, they only want to take a look at one view, and that's, abortion, and not look at what's going to happen to that child or children after they're born. So I think we need to take a look at a much broader concept of that. Another thing is, I've read through the years that W.A. Criswell, the president of the Southern Baptist Convention in the 70s at Roe v. Wade, didn't think that the abortion issue was a very important issue. And the Southern Baptist Convention didn't make that an issue for about 5 or 6 years, only after Phyllis Schlafly came on the scene and started to want women be controlled. So I think we need to take a look at in a bigger context. And my third point is, I struggle with how relevant the Bible is. A book that was written 2,500 years ago applies to me in the year 2022. It just seems like it's just a stretch. And there's a lot of things in the Old Testament and even in the New Testament that I'm just not sure how it applies to us today. I think it should be one of the issues or one of the sources, but I'm not sure that it's the major source. So anyway, that's kind of my heresy here, but I'm really not asking a question. I guess I'm making a statement. So anyway, okay. All right. I want to go to George. I see you, Simona. I'm trying to get the others in here as we can. And we're just about ready to close up. But George, your question or statement?
Thank you, Forrest. Please don't mute me by mistake. I think that we cannot finish this class without a couple of things. One is established already that the Bible does not have a set of rules on this. Well, in the absence of guidance, specific guidance, what do? That's when I think that we need to establish some guidance based on common sense. No scripture, but there's common sense. And very shortly, I would say my position has been and can differ from others, no problem, that I'm pro-choice in the sense that if a couple decides, they choose to have sexual relationships and there is a result, as a result comes a fertilized egg and then a baby and all that, well, they have to be responsible for their choice. If the case is rape or there's a medical condition, I think that choice is also their prerogative, because I support that. If someone is raped, girl is raped, your daughter is raped or whatever, and becomes pregnant in circumstances like that, common sense probably would say abortion can take place with no problem. Or medical problems, the mother is gonna die, or the fetus is already, physically deformed and things like this. I think that we need more common sense and less of fanaticism, religious fanaticism. Some people talk like if they have the last word, and that's the God's words already, This is spiritual arrogance. We need less of this and more common sense. That was just my comment. Thank you.
Progress.
All right, thank you very much. David, we're coming up to 12:30 and I do have Simona hand up again. Did you want to take that or did you want to go to the afterglow or the
why don't we, there's no one else wanting to speak than
No,
Simona?
I
Okay,
don't
let's hear from her, then we'll conclude at that point.
Okay, Simona?
Thank you. I think there is an important issue here that Gerald mentioned, and that is the issue of forcing someone. And I think the principle that is mentioned in the Bible overtly and covertly of free will, that God did not force human beings to serve him, but he gave us a chance, a free will to choose one way or the other. And we have that choice throughout a lifetime. And if you go into the Bible, you're going to see this issue of free will coming over and over and over again. So how can a church that has been given the right to choose whether to live or die through faith, through eternity, have the right to impose their opinion on another human being? I think this is a fundamental issue. We can talk about, whether we are going to support this issue or not support this issue. My view is this, that we all have the right to have our own religious view, whatever that is, ethical view, whatever that is, we can discuss it, but we have no right to impose it on another human being. And I think this is a critical point where I have a problem with majority of so-called pro-life people. It is important that people have the right to say what happens to their body. A woman has the right to say what happens to her body. And I cannot step away from that, because if we stop abortions, we say abortions are, not allowed. What are we actually saying? We are saying that this woman must give birth. And I think this part of force where, people who are enforcing these views are saying, well, these are our religious views. And I'm going to tell you one thing: people who are able to force today a woman to give birth because of their religious opinions are the same people who are tomorrow going to force you to worship on Sunday because of those same religious views. So the freedom is really important here. I think it's a foundational principle of Christianity.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I am going to turn this back over to David, but before I do, I'd just like to let Dr. Winslow know that I agree with him in regards to that rape issue. It's reprehensible not to include that in the discussion. So anyway, coming back to you, David.
I have to respond to that, Forrest, quickly, because the Sunday thing came in and it's not just.
Yeah,
So
okay.
I have to.
Oh yeah, I see. Okay. All
we
right.
have to be very, very, very careful on either extremes, that it's all or nothing. First of all, no church makes you by force. As far as I know, I belong to the Greek Orthodox. Well, even with the Catholic, they do not force you to do anything, number one. Number two, to equate that with the church make us worship on Sundays, as bad as someone have told me in another session that the Armageddon will happen because of the people that believe in a soul. We have to stop doing that. The other thing is, again, is not all or nothing. Those that some of us believe in God's providence, whatever, we do not want to impose it on others. But we want to say that it's not the one or the other. For instance, we cannot do anything we want. No, I have to finish without bodies. We don't have the right to kill anybody or to make anybody get pain. So I think by having certain laws about certain times to take the one, no abortions at all, or this or that, it's very naive at the least and very injurious and not true. So we need some ethical laws, some laws that I cannot go and kill somebody or with my body injure somebody else, that I have the right to do that. If that fetus has pain, as Donna has said, and suffering and all this, forget the religious thing. Is it the right thing to not have any laws to prevent somebody else's suffering? And please stop blaming the Sunday worshipers.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, David, I am to you, back to you now.
Well, I got something going here. I don't. Jerry, did you want to say anything more?
No. This will go on, of course. We'll have plenty of opportunities to continue, especially with the way the Supreme Court seems to be headed. So we won't be finished with. There's a lot of legislation coming forward now in California. I've been reading the proposals, including one ballot initiative. So we will have this topic with us for the foreseeable future.
Good. What I'd like to do next is to take, I think there are three, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there are three different SDA statements on this issue. And I would like to, as a group, read through all three and see what differences there may be and what similarities there may be. Are there more than three, Jerry?
In our time, as far as I know, no. There was a statement in the 1970s, one in the 1990s, and one in 2019. So 3, as far as I know.
So every generation of Adventists returns to this issue. And it's interesting, I think, to notice how much they change and how little they change, both. I think both of them. Now, next week, we have a potluck. So be sure to keep that in mind. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.
Gerald, can you wait for a few minutes?
Oh, sure. I'm
I-
sorry. I've been sort of in and out today. I got called away, so I missed.
David, have you made McKinley a host yet, co-host yet?